Right, let's get this panel going. You've met some of these faces before who come back on the stage. It's Terje Søviknes, the Minister for Petroleum and Energy from Norway, Tom van Eiland from the European Commission, Teresa Ponce de Lau from European Energy Research, Margaret Ovren from Statoil, Jürgen Schupper, the Executive Vice President of Statkraft. We haven't met him before. He has been with Statkraft for many years in a number of roles. Now he's the Senior Vice President of Continental and South American Energy, heading up their energy management and development activities for the continental and UK portfolios, as well as market activities in South America. So here's our expert group. Gosh, I think lots already to talk about, lots of ideas and lots of things coming through. Something that came out in the last session was that technology should really shape policy. Now, Margaret, I know you're not a politician, but technology has really been shaping Statoil, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think we have been and we are a technology-driven company for many years. And on the Norwegian continental shelf has been a kind of a demo lab for developing and also implementing technology. So maybe I'm a bit technology freak. I think technology is solving a lot of questions. But
Margaret, we know that you're a party animal. Yeah. You're a technology freak. We're learning quite a lot about Margaret today.
Yeah. But I think, as Teresa said, I think technology and policy is going hand in hand. And technology, if you're developing a technology that can influence policies, at the same time, we see, for instance, in Norway that we have less taxation on electrical vehicles, which about 25% of the Norwegian cars now, which are sold, are electrical vehicles. We also see what we, in Norway, as Terje alluded to, in 1990s, the government introduced a CO2 tax. And of course, we have been working a lot on the technology side to reduce our CO2 intensity due to the tax, because that is also profitable for us.
Profitable.
So hand in hand, it needs to be profitable.
But you mentioned profitable for you, because it's all very well, we talk about these ideas, we talk about the future of humankind and climate change. It's costing companies money, but at the end of the day, for companies like yours and yours, that there's a bottom line to think about, shareholders to answer to.
Yes, you said it's costing companies a lot of money, but of course we have to see that this shift is simply needed, and there is a great business out there for many companies as well. So the renewable shift is not anything that is a threat, it's an opportunity, very clearly. And we are, as a company, we are the largest renewable generator in Europe with 66 terawatt hours at this moment, and we are also investing globally, and we are learning a lot from those markets. And we see markets where there is a lot of competition for these investments. There's no lack of capital to invest into renewable energies in India, for instance. People are lining up and they are competing, and if there is a trouble with the return, it's because there's too much competition on too little investments. And too little investments in India, that means 175 gigawatt of renewable investments for the years to come. So this is a big opportunity for the whole sector, and the shift is happening. What is worrying us a little bit, however, is that this shift in Europe is slower, it's slowing down. Europe has been a driver for all these changes from early on, and right now, with all the adjustments and the modifications of legislation that we see and that we appreciate and acknowledge, we still see that other countries are moving faster, and Europe is losing its kind of role as a driver of all this change, and hence also the role of being a beneficiary of all the technology developments and all the innovations being made here. That doesn't put us behind, but it definitely means that we should accelerate and, for instance, take additional measures down the road to make the ETS system not just mechanically fixed, but also producing meaningful price levels.
You say it doesn't put Europe behind, but Teresa, what do you think? Is Europe playing catch-up in this space?
Yes, I think there are good examples, and taking the point on that we're talking about technology should shape policy or otherwise, I think I can share some two good examples. One good example and the other I would like to be, which was the planning for the deployment of wind. You know that Portugal is very well placed regarding wind energy production. And why this is like this is because the government studied with universities and technology institutes first where the resource was, how was the grid, committed the grid to say, to define the different places for potential, integrated with the environmental concerns, environmental constraints, and then developed a plan based on these topics. And this is why it was successful, because the project involved all stakeholders, and it was a success, and is a success till now. Now we are doing exactly the same for our government, but regarding the planning for solar energy in the southern part of Portugal, also with the grid, also with the environmental constraints, and with the objective to connect with Morocco. So I think it's the good way. We have the technology, we know the resource potential, we know the technology to propose, we know the constraints of the network, we can evaluate them, and that is the right way to do it. Of course, most of the energy problems are multidisciplinarity and the question of integration. But if we have the resources from universities and institutions, okay, we just politicians should ask the universities and the institutes to analyze the problem and give the solutions.
So let's talk to one of the politicians.
Yeah.
Terry, do you think that the energy sector is going to be a driver for green economic growth, or is it going to need to be a subsidized transition?
Oh, I'm definitely thinking it's going to be a driver, the most important driver. And of course, the governments might have to do some subsidies, or more, I think they have to, for the energy sector, work on the overhead with the tax systems. Both carbon tax is obvious, and of course we have to work with research and technology development with state fund and in collaboration with company funds, and stimulate the technologies, new technologies. And in some cases, we also have to subsidize new technologies in the early phase when it's new and you have to bring it onto the market. But in the long term, and that's my point, it can't be subsidized forever because that's not sustainable.
You keep saying what we have to do, what we have to do. What
we
are you doing now?
Yeah,
what
we are
doing
it.
now? Okay.
I talked a little bit about our Norwegian company, state company, Enova, who is stimulating technology, new technologies, and working with the markets to introduce new technologies and make this shift. And the vehicles, the electrical vehicles, is probably the best known example, because we are building charging stations all over the country, and of course we have lower taxes on new vehicles as well. And this system working together, as Margaret said, today one out of 4 cars is electrical, new car sales.
And of course, we've got a whole session later on after lunch, which is talking about electrification, and I'm sure we're going to, and transport as well, so we can dig deeper a little bit on that.
If I could say something else, ordinary cars is one issue, but now we are pushing it further on with ferries and with the cars used in companies in transportation sector.
Tom, you're looking on and you can see what's happening in Norway, what they're doing here. But in terms of EU members and the European Commission, what can you learn from countries like Norway in terms of coordinating policy and integrating systems?
Well, I think Norway. Certainly.
Do we have a handheld mic that we could just quickly give to Tom? Because
Maybe.
There we go. Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry.
It's tricky to talk while someone's fiddling with your nether regions. Yeah.
Modern technology. Okay. No, what can we learn from Norway? I think, well, certainly technology development is an element. Norway has been, I think, a pioneer for an almost fully green electricity system in Europe. Of course, they have the geographical advantages to do it, but they've done it. I think that is the nice thing. Similarly, on technology and policy interaction, I think Norway did put well, a CO2 tax in its energy system on the production side a while ago, before we had the ETS. That has created the first commercial carbon and capture storage facility in Europe. So I think that are examples where, well, good policies that allow the market to play can lead to results. For the rest, I think what is also an interesting element, I think, is the fact that Norway is willing to work with Europe on that. The fact that Norway is integrated in our emission trading system is a good example. That, well, they do policy in the larger setting with us, so that's certainly to encourage.
Thank you. You look like you were about to say something. No? You're just taking a breath. Because I wanted to ask you, you mentioned... Yeah,
sometimes I do.
That's fine. We were talking there about the CO2 tax and CO2 emissions, reducing them. That's been a cornerstone of Statoil's policy for some time. Well, talk us through what you're doing and how you've incorporated it.
First of all, Statoil is an energy company, as I said in the introduction, and we believe that oil and gas will also be very important in decades to come. And we are working along two different axes. First of all, we try to build an oil and gas portfolio which is low carbon, and then we are, of course, we are working on building a material position within renewables. And actually this week we are launching our climate roadmap. With regards to the oil and gas side, we aim to be the most carbon efficient oil and gas producer in the world. We have set up very clear targets on how much reduction we pursue going forward on the oil and gas portfolio side. We are working on energy efficiency, and in particular due to our high CO2 tax. And our CO2 tax is probably 10 times the ETS quota. So it's big, so it's not a small tax.
Not a token gesture.
No, and we have been working on energy efficiency for many years. Then we work on new concepts to establish concept on the sea floor instead of on a platform, because that is more energy efficient. We are working on the CCUS. We have been injecting CO2 on the Sleipner field for 20 years now. We are still work on a total value chain for CCUS.
Then it means there's
I have a few more things.
Go on.
Yeah, and
you are our sponsors after all.
Yeah. And now we are starting to look at how can we decarbonize our natural gas chain. That is also very interesting. It is promising. It's too costly yet, but of course this is something we need to do on the technology side. With regards to the renewable side, we have officially been out and said that 15 to 20% of our capex in 2030 will be within the new energy solutions area if we find profitable projects. So, and of course we are pursuing, at the moment we are having projects on the wind side contributing to 1 million households in Europe. We are still working on wind, but it's also, we are also pursuing whether solar could be something for Statoil, and geothermal and so on. So, yeah.
So all of this has meant, over 20 years we're talking about, a change of culture, a change of mindset from the corporate, from the industry point of view. Is that something that you've also seen?
We see that a lot, and I would like to relate back to the comment that we have heard earlier about customers. This change doesn't have to happen on the level of suppliers, this has to happen on the level of customers, and then suppliers will respond to that, and we see that change happening now, and that's one of the elements where we have to understand our customers in a much better way. So we are really happy to see that transition happening now, not only in Norway, not only in Europe, but it's a global development. If you look at the last year, 86% of investments in the EU have been in renewable installations. That's an enormous number, that's impressive. But we have to face the fact that this was primarily driven by subsidies. And I fully agree with you here that we need to get into a territory where subsidies on proven technologies are not needed any longer. That's one of the major elements that we need to strive for. And one of the aspects here is that in a situation where the interaction of different regulations, ETS, renewable energy targets, energy saving, and so on, has led to a situation where the total energy price is very low and the ETS price is very low at the same time, it will be very difficult to come to such a stable situation of having commercial investments in renewables unless we are solving this kind of vicious cycle. So that's one important regulatory challenge in my view that we have. A bit of an escape route here is actually the customer who sees that whole pattern and still wants to kind of have a green and acceptable portfolio. So we are working in parallel here also with customers directly, and that's a mindset change.
I can see a couple of the cards are up, so I'd like to bring in some of our expert panel now, but you'll have to forgive me, I can't actually see as far as where you're sitting. And so, gentleman in the blue jumper, if you could just remind us who you are, because I can't see that far, and I'll remember for next time.
Okay, yeah, I'm the man in the blue jumper. I'm also a professor at NTNU. My name is Magnus Korpås. I have a question to the panelists. You are free to answer if you want. Who wants to answer it? You can decide yourself. But it's about the demand for oil. Yesterday, the IEA presented a new report on medium-term oil market, the medium-term oil market report. And according to their new studies, they predict a quite higher demand for oil in the medium term that they have done previously. So the world demand of oil is probably increasing more than even their current policy scenario from the World Energy Outlook. And my question to the panelists is just that, is this good or bad news?
Mm-hmm. Margaret, do you want to kick that one off?
It maybe depends on who you ask.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I think from the base scenario they already have, they have prognosed a bit down on the oil demand going forward, but for the oil and gas altogether, it is an increase, and the gas side is probably even higher, even higher increase on the demand side. Yeah, oil demand. I think, to be honest, I think we see that renewables are starting to get competitive now in the market, in particular in some markets. But at the same time, the renewable side can't keep up with the increasing demand from the previous IEA report. They prognosed 30% increase in energy demand up to 2040, and that is a lot. I haven't read the new report from IEA, and I don't know the reason behind it. But we see on the number of cars will probably be doubled. But at the same time, you have biofuels, you have more efficient cars, you have also electrical cars, so you will have a reduction, even though you have a double amount of cars, reduction on the oil demand on the car side, but on the maritime side, on the freight side, and petrochemical side, you have a significant increase for the demand for oil. So, yeah.
Anyone on this side of the room want to weigh in, Minister?
Not about the new report from the EIA, but it's important in our discussion to realize that in 2040 there will be still a lot of gas and oil in the energy mix. And in the debate, often when you talk, especially with the youth, they think that, oh, no, it's not any demand for oil and gas in the future. It's only solar, wind, and hydropower. But that's not correct. We have to deal with the facts. And as I said in my speech, the world's population is increasing, and we need more energy. And a lot of that energy has to come from oil and gas in the future. And we have to work on how can we produce that with less CO2 emissions in the production phase, as Statoil works with. And we have to, in long term, work with the CCS and CCSU problems. I think that's the only way we can reach our goals.
So while we're looking for alternative sources, you're looking at ways too of evolving fossil fuels and natural gases at the same time.
It's great that solar and wind are increasing, but it's coming from a really low level. In the energy mix today, I think it's about 2% of the total. And it's going to increase, but not as much as you could imagine if you only listen to the debate.
Just quickly, because I've got lots of more questions to bring in.
I just had a comment to him, because you know, the increase of oil demand will be a challenge for all of us, because you know, the last years we haven't found that, or we haven't discovered that much oil worldwide. And you know, there's a lot. The investment levels have been lower, and we haven't sanctioned the big projects the last years. And at the same time, we have a natural decline in all the oil fields globally, 5–6%. So that will be a challenge for all of us to be able to match that increase of demand.
I can see some steam coming out of... I want to move on now. Steam coming out of Marco Malley's ears, so I'm going to hand over to you. Go for it.
Thanks. Okay, so just to clarify what I said before about the consumer, and I don't want to get into it any further, is that if you look at it, I'm an engineer, I'm proud of it, but my colleague here next door to me here mentioned technology driving policy. If engineers and economists were to design the energy system, the consumer wouldn't want it. We'd certainly build it for you, but they don't want it. So my point is that there's a balance to be struck between what the consumer will accept and what engineers will give them. And that's why I think the consumer is so important. So let's park that. I'd like to ask the Minister a question, if I could. During the discussion, a man's name, Mr. T, we'll call him for a minute, was mentioned about, you know, and that he wanted to open the coal mines, etc. Now, I understand that coal has got more carbon intensity than oil and gas, etc. But, you know, you are a bit of a hypocrite because what you're saying is you're going to take all the oil and gas out. So he's just the same as you. He wants to extract his resources, you want to extract yours. And my question, so you are a hypocrite, to be honest. I'm just being logical about it. But my fundamental question is, could Norway afford to do what it's doing without the oil and gas revenues? Could you afford to subsidize Tesla cars, which are essentially a tax avoidance scheme for the rich?
Could you do any of what you're doing without your oil money, is the question.
Well, we are going to work with oil and gas in Norway for decades to come, as I said. And it's important, you have to take the global perspective. The world needs gas and oil for a long, long time. And if you have a lower carbon emissions from the Norwegian oil and gas production, why shouldn't we produce it? If we don't produce in Norway, well, some other oil and gas province will produce it because the demand is there. It's quite simple in my head. I don't think I'm a hypocrite thinking like that. And it's a big difference between my point of view and the view that we should increase the coal use in the global energy mix, like you could measure out of Mr. Trump's ideas.
Johan.
Afford this. I mean, Tesla cars are in Norway because it's a tax avoidance scheme, correct? Most of the countries in the world can't afford that tax avoidance scheme because they need the tax. You have the oil revenues.
I know that. Of course, Norway is a rich country, and we have a large benefit of our natural resources, both hydropower in over 100 years, and now the oil and gas production for the last 50 years. But I made a point in my speech which was quite important. We need to use different measures, the energy transition needs different solutions in different countries. And Norway is in a special position. I underlined that in my speech. So we can do something now that other countries may do 10 or 20 years in the future.
I'll follow up a little bit. Of course, Mali, we have to be the first mover to bring the cost of the technology down, and that's the possibility we can have in Norway.
Could you just introduce yourself briefly to the rest of the audience?
My name is Johan Hustad. I'm a Director of Energy at NTNU. My question is, because yesterday part of the expert group discussed quite a lot about carbon capture and storage, and there were very different views on how important that technology will come to be in the future. So my question is related to that we have very much experience, as Margaret said, in storage. We have quite a lot of experience also in industrial capture of CO2. And of course, in the research community, we have quite a lot of experience with CCS. So my question is to the minister, are you prepared to say to the expert panel here that you will take some actions to the next step, which is the whole value chain, capture, transport, and storage of CO2, and let Norway be in the forefront of this technology for Europe?
Yes. The government has one target. We want to realize a full-scale CCS project. We have this project is going on as we are sitting here because we had feasibility studies last year. Now it's a concept study phase, and in spring 2019, we are heading for a possible investment decision on a full capture, transport, and storage chain. It's quite interesting because in some of these, well, let me put it like this. CCS might not be the solution for energy production and cutting CO2s from gas and oil. But I think for the industry, it's really important because they have no other options than using and for the chemical industry, there's a lot of emissions due to the production, not their energy demand. So I think CCS will be important, and we are taking a leading role in the world. But we really want to have some more together with us in this project, both countries and companies, because it's costly. It's really costly, and one of our goals is to bring down costs and to develop new technologies that we want to share. It's a fully open project. We want to share all our knowledge and with other countries, both in EU. We have a cooperation with Canada, Australia, and a lot of interesting companies and institutes working on CCS.
You say it's costly, so you need partnerships, you need people. Is this a call to arms, if you like, to encourage the students, the PhDs, the masters that we've got in the audience to say that this is the future that they need to invest in?
I don't think you should invest only in working with CCS, but I'm really. It's important that young people make choices that can make them, that they could work with both oil and gas, CCS, renewable energy for the years to come, because we need the bright heads.
Teresa, I can see you furiously scribbling away there. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah. No, I was looking at your question and the answer of the minister, and I would say that young people should not only on this area, but should be incentivized to look at CCS, because if you don't know it, we cannot decide on it. So we have to be able and to create the capabilities to tackle all contributions, all possible solutions. So we should know more about CCS. I know that I don't know the figures. I'm just an electrotechnical engineer, so I'm also an engineer. So, regarding CCS, I know that storage can enhance the production of oil. So I think it's something that should be tackled, and something that not all but part of young people should study and make more deep studies.
If I could give some additional comments to the CCS and the CCUS, I think it takes too long time. You know, I'm impatient. I want to have the results faster. But I think the project you were talking about is very important for Norway and also for global use, because we need a full scale. And we have assessed the different storage opportunities on the Norwegian continental shelf, so we have opportunities to store. Then I think it's also very valuable for the industrial companies that have CO2 to get rid of. So we will And there is a kind of a bidding round at the moment on this CCS project. With regards to the enhanced oil recovery, this is also something we are pursuing, whether we can use this to increase the recovery. At the same time, CO2 is also corrosive, so you need to. It's better to do it on a new installation. So you have to. It's not that easy to get it profitable at the moment. So, but if we are going to decarbonize the natural gas, for instance, we also need CCS. So I think CCS will be important going forward, but it takes too long time. But we have an expert panel; they can help us with that.
I think so.
It should be.
But the more we talk about it, the more
we should ask them
everything
questions.
is intertwined. Niels, remind us again where you're from, and then fire away.
So I'm Niels Røkke, I'm Executive Vice President of the SINTEF in Trondheim. So I've got 2 comments and 1 question. The first comment is really about the slogan in Norway for the time being, which is there will be no green shift with red numbers in your accounts, you know. I'd say that's completely different, actually. There will be no profitability without the green shift, is my view on this. Just looking at some industrial sectors in Europe, which has not taken up on this trend and which is virtually bankrupt. I think it's really important that we take this into account and that the companies see the opportunities and grasp the opportunities we have now to actually be part of this green shift instead of trying to dream ourselves back to good old days when emissions was not a limitations on growth, you could say. And I hear all this talk about how costly this is. Actually, it's not, you know. It's actually a minute cost difference from what we would do without going for renewables and for a sustainable energy system. And just look at the cost, you know, for instance, from pollution in the UK, a recent report, 40,000 fatalities per year, you know. I mean, what's the cost of that? I think it's not fair to compare something which is sustainable to something which is not. You know. It's a wrong impression, in my view. And the second is towards the comment about cars, you know, which was from the left side here. It's amazing how much concern there is about the 3% of the stock of cars in Norway, which is electrical, and that we send this money to California. I would remind you that actually 97% of all the investment in the cars in Norway is sent to support non-sustainable solutions to Germany, to France, to Italy, to Japan, and so forth. So I would, you know, this is policy, it's something we want to do, and we should not make that problematic, that we're actually investing in something which is a long-term solution. Now to my question, which is about something which I think has been lacking in the discussion, which is about legislation, regulations, taxes and incentives. If you look back to what has been the success of Norway, the carbon tax in '91, for instance, the electric vehicle incentives, well, they are part of legislation, regulations, taxes or incentives. And with such a massive market failure we have in this area, I would like the panelists to discuss a bit how could that play a role in it. In my own opinion, I think that's crucial. It will not happen before we actually regulate this and have a legislation around sustainability and low emissions.
Tom, regulation, regulation, regulation. Discuss.
Okay. I hope this works. Yeah, okay, good. I'm not certain to what market failure you refer, but I think to some extent the criticism that the carbon price today in the ETS is not driving the kinds of changes you want, I think is a fair one. We've said that the incentive signal that you get today is not what it is or should be. Like I said, we are going to remedy that. The Market Stability Reserve will enter into operation. On the other hand, I mean, it is also factual that we have succeeded in reducing emissions in Europe beyond what we had set as a target. And in that way, I mean, the mechanism also works. I mean, it didn't create, let's say, additional challenges in, well, at some point during the economic crisis. But okay, we want to make sure that it's a tool for the future and we will adapt to that. Your other question was for other types of regulation. Like I think I tried to show is that we are well aware that it's combinations of policies that can drive change. We have in our car, I didn't actually talk about cars today. I mean, also there we have made last year a communication, and this year we will come forward with an update of our CO2 and cars regulation. So we are aware that you need accommodating policies that are not only the price signal. Again, eco-design is also an example. And don't forget, we have also emissions outside of the energy system, which also need to be tackled. For that, we are trying to see if, for instance, in our agriculture policy, we can create incentives to reduce emissions there too. So we need many policies. But indeed, the carbon price signal was low and is not what it needs to be to drive the long-term investments, but we are trying to remedy that.
Jürgen.
Yeah, I think the carbon market and the system is a very good example of how difficult it actually is to design good regulation, and I think Europe has now a lot of experience on that, and the focus in the next period should be on learning from that further on. What has happened in the past is that other regulations have overlapped the carbon market regulation, such that the original balance that people had in mind when designing the carbon market was getting out of control. And that has actually made the price collapse, and even with the adjustments that we think go in the right direction, the price will still, with all likelihood, be very low until 2030. And that puts us behind in terms of innovation, because there will be nobody deriving any incentive from that system in order to develop solutions for the future. And that is what is worrying me. So sometimes, perhaps, we need to also reconsider and make things more simple. There are several countries who have introduced carbon floors, and also for Norway, that could perhaps be an idea to go forward. And I think if you look at the total landscape in Europe, there are several countries who are proposing this now. And for all the sympathy we have for market mechanisms, and without any change, we believe they would be the superior tool. If that fails, we perhaps have to reconsider a more simple mechanism just to get the system going.
Okay. I know we could all talk about this for a bit longer, but we are running out of time, and I've got lots of cards up, so I want to bring in some more of the panelists. The gentleman here, Snorre.
Thank you. My name is Snorre Kvørndok from the Frisch Center. I just have a comment to the minister. He mentioned that the good brains should go to, as far as I understand, if I understand it correctly, to the oil and gas sector. That's good for oil and gas sector. But if you take a more broad view on this, a fast development, a fast technological development for oil and gas makes it much harder for renewable energy to substitute oil and gas in the long run. So if you take a broad view on this, it's probably better that good brains goes to the renewable energy, because if we should have a higher substitution of oil and gas in the long run, we should actually have a much faster technological development in renewable energy.
Any response?
Excuse me, I think I didn't hear any question, but I take it as a comment.
It was a comment, yeah.
Yeah.
Would you like to
I
respond
think
to the comment?
I think we are not completely agreed on this issue, but of course we can take that afterwards.
Okay, the gentleman will take it outside. Karen. Karen Fisher.
I think this is related to some of the past couple comments. European countries are spending more than 100 times as much on deployment of renewable energy as they are on R&D. And so I'm wondering if you think that if this is a reasonable distribution of public support for renewable energies. And the other question I have is if you feel like the focus on domestic deployment has at all impeded the engagement by EU firms in these dynamic emerging markets that you mentioned before? Or are they primarily focused on Europe, or is it functioning as the springboard that you'd like?
Jürgen, which one are you going to tackle first, the research or the second?
Let me quickly say something on the research then. I think it's not possible to say what is the right ratio between funds spent on research and funds spent on subsidies, but I think it's fair to say that the subsidy money should go down and has to go down. If you take the example of a country where I come from, Germany, they spend like 25 billion euros every year on the renewable subsidy. And this is money that Norway doesn't have to spend because the electricity sector is already renewable. So it's a big opportunity in Norway to actually have a lot higher, a much higher ratio on this particular number than Germany, for instance. So there's not one number for everything. But in general, I agree that subsidies should over time go down, and we should stop subsidizing technologies that are not reaching maturity and focus on those that have a big potential going forward.
Did you want to chip in with the second part of the question?
Yeah, no. Sorry, I each time forget, sorry. Yeah, I each time forget my thingy doesn't work. The question on should R&D go up, I think the point was made already in the previous presentation. There is an intention by EU policymakers and our member states to increase those budgets, so that's clear. Well, the numbers you put are quite stark, but you can also return it. I mean, we have been able to create a market out there, and we have, through that market, also made sure that the market itself has developed and well, innovated quite a lot. The price reductions we've seen in solar and wind, they are much larger than, because we have a lot of economic modelers also in the panel here. Price reductions have been much larger than we have expected like 15 years ago when we were doing the first projections. So deployment itself has also its benefits when it comes down to innovation. But okay, in Europe you have the additional discussion on how to see that progress over time. And as said, we would like to have to make sure that the market functioning comes more into play. Renewable support will remain for a while because, as said, they are not yet fully competitive, well, on a few exceptions. But I think the first, we are going more and more for a tendering kind of system. The first results for that in a number of member states we've implemented that are quite encouraging, with quite low prices for new renewables investments. So I think your question has many elements to it, but it's not that black and white, I think.
Okay, we've got time for just two more, so we'll have Volker, Cray, and then the gentleman on that side of the room afterwards. Okay, Volker.
Yeah, thanks. I would have a comment on the CCS question that was maybe already beaten to death, but regardless. I mean, from a technical point of view, I would definitely agree that there is probably more value in having CCS available in sectors other than the electricity sector. Because in electricity, we know there are a bunch of low carbon options, and some of them are really developing in a prominent way. So industry, but also potentially liquid fuel production, could be more relevant technologies combined with CCS. So if you produce biofuels, for example, you're anyway generating a pretty pure stream of CO2, and so the capture technology is in some sense also much simpler there and much less costly as an add-on compared to doing this without CCS. But there are economies of scale because these facilities are small. Regardless of this technical analysis, I think from a fossil CCS perspective, I actually see a big value in having this technology for getting buy-in from fossil fuel industries, kind of reducing opposition towards a transformation. I mean, again, I'm hoping I'm not beating this argument to death because I made it yesterday. There are millions of miners out there, and if you look at the European situation, it took many countries several decades to phase down vis-a-vis fierce opposition their mining business. We still have a couple of countries with quite large mining sectors, and CCS, I think from that perspective, could be a social way of phasing coal mining and other extracting industries out over longer time horizons. I think that's to a good degree a social science question, how to address that. And yeah, I mean, with the experts on the panel and the decision makers, is that something that you are, is that a question that is being asked? I think that needs active research and, I mean, funding for this type of research. Yeah, which I'm not sure is happening at the scale that we might need it to get the buy-in.
Okay, Volker, thank you. Very quickly, because I want to get one more comment in from the expert panel.
Yeah, very quickly, keeping coal industry alive without a commercial case, I think has not been a success anywhere, for all I know about it. So I think there must be a commercial case as well. And today, solar is outperforming on pure energy terms coal in India and Chile already, and this will spread out. So I'm a bit worried if we focus on just keeping coal alive. That is not the right type of incentive, in my view.
I think he was talking about phasing it out rather than it being a sharp shock to communities and to economies like we've seen over past decades. John?
Thank you.
Is it a question or a comment?
It's a short comment and posing a wider question for maybe later discussion. Okay. John Cooper, Fuels Europe. Fuels Europe is the association for the petroleum refining industry, representing that industry to the Brussels institutions. We have as our members Statoil, BP, Total, Shell, many companies that are oil and gas, but also significant investors in renewables. And so they look very closely about what difference they can make. And I can be very clear that these companies want to be part of the solution longer term. We recognize the climate challenge as a global challenge requiring global action. And I wanted to come and pick up the point that Magnus put into the room about the outlook for oil. And much of the work done by IEA and others shows that the world will be using oil for some decades. I wanted to reflect on the fact that we've been through a big price adjustment in the last couple of years, and there are many that believe that we will not see a return to $100 oil. At $40 to $60 oil, oil is an incredible bargain to the world economy. It means you can put $20 plus tax into a car and drive from one side of Europe to the other with your family. It's an incredible bargain, and it's also an incredible revenue-raising opportunity for governments. There's no other energy that can be taxed at 200 or 300% and still has substantial demand. And so we should be realistic that the world will carry on using petroleum for decades. And the question that I pose is, so what can we make of the opportunity in Europe to make a difference globally? Because it's very clear that if we take our demand for petroleum down to near zero in Europe over the next couple of decades, it will not answer the climate challenge. And in fact, unless you can really make a difference, if Europe can export its solutions to help the rest of the world adjust its relationship with petroleum, then we won't get to a solution. So I'd like to repose the question, which is about what difference can Europe make to coach the rest of the world in terms of its relationship with petroleum to help it to be part of the solution.
Minister, what message are you hoping to throw out there to Europe? Do you want to change your
relationship
with oil?
It's a large question, needs a large debate, I think, but it's an interesting perspective because it's quite right. We can't do anything in Norway on our own. We can't do anything in Europe on our own if we can't get this to fly globally. But I think in Norway, it's correct that someone have appointed here that we are in a special situation. We have some billion Norwegian crowns in funds due to the oil and gas industry for 50 years. And we can use some money on research and technology development, which later on can be used both in Europe and worldwide. And I think that's our contribution to the targets we need to reach.
So you're throwing money at the problem?
I think we have knowledge. The population in Norway, we have knowledge. We have great schools, universities, research communities, and we can use them together with our money from the oil and gas industry to bring technologies further on and develop new solutions.
So Norway's relationship with oil has helped it pioneer new innovations and
yeah, it's obvious.
New partnerships.
Obvious. We are a great starting point.
Closing remarks from each person. Anyone else got anything to add?
No, I just, with regards to the competence side, I see in Statoil we utilize the oil and gas competence also on the renewable side. For instance, on the wind and the offshore wind side, we utilize the supply chain competence, the material competence, the rotating machinery competence, the geo-survey, the operation and maintenance competence. You know, it's, I think it is important really to utilize this, the competence we have got in the oil and gas side, also on the renewable side. We can use for the CCS or the CCUS. Of course, the reservoir engineers are very important for the storage part. For geothermal, you need the drilling and well guys. So that is also important.
So it's working with what you've got to look towards the future and to innovate. Well, everybody on the panel, thank you. Thank you to our experts a little bit lower down, and thank you to the audience. We are now taking a break for lunch, but we will be back in an hour or so. So do come back, because we've got a super afternoon with more brain teasers and more deep analysis. We're going to be talking about electrification. We're also going to be talking about financing. The money behind the energy transition. Who's going to pay for it? How we're going to pay for it. So do come back.